Tēnā koutou, everyone. Yes, I'm Andrea. I grew up in Tauranga, but I've lived in Hamilton for about 14 years now, and it's been a good move. Thanks to all the speakers so far, and thank you to Uramu for designing this wonderful garden, which is a place I've always loved. It's just magnificent. I know that during lockdown, a lot of us kind of realised a few different things about life, and one was how quickly our mind shifts can change when we're not sure that there's going to be food on the supermarket shelves. And the need to secure food for our families became a little bit overwhelming for some of us. For me, I was so happy to have fruit and vegetables in the garden, and I just became aware of how global our food supply chain is. We are eating, if we had a food footprint, we'd have really long toes going all over the world, and so we're relying on massive industries and ships and planes to get it to us. At the moment that doesn't feel like a really sustainable thing, so I'm keener than ever to be growing fruit and vegetables and to inspire other people to do so. Another thing a lot of us learned is how soothing it is to spend time in the garden. It is so good for the mind and the body, and and humans everywhere feel the same thing. So I don't actually fly anymore, and I'd already decided not to before COVID-19, but when I was travelling internationally a couple of years ago, I saw food growing everywhere in pots in the middle of Hong Kong, which is of course incredibly built up. I saw a vegetable garden right next to the Notre Dame. This is before it burnt. I saw a vegetable garden in St James's Park in London. When I was in Seattle, there's suburb after suburb where all the verges on the side of the road are planted, almost all of them with gardens, fruit and vegetables being a lot of what's growing. And so going for just a simple walk along the footpath is just having abundance everywhere. It's a really amazing feeling. And I spoke to one gardener who was working on the patch outside her property, and I explained that in New Zealand we hardly ever saw anyone growing on the berms, and she obviously thought we were nuts. There's also, of course, amazing food growing examples here in New Zealand, where we are right now, the sustainable backyard. Just a few more examples is last year I went to the Taranaki Sustainable Backyards Trail, and I saw my first food forest with in a backyard with fruit trees as like the canopy in the forest, and then growing on the ground were perennial plants that gave fruit and vegetables and herbs, and it was really magnificent, just such a feeling of abundance and very productive. And of course there's wonderful places in Hamilton as well. We've got, I was last week at Mahana Organics, which is someone's garden. She grows food for herself and her family, but she also sells it just from her own front yard, so people can actually supplement their income with these things. So it's safe to assume, I think, that future generations in Kirikiriroa will feel the same. They're going to need space to grow food. They're going to want to take advantage of the healing power of growing plants. And the people who are best placed to make sure they've got space to do that is us right now, because as the population grows, Hamilton's going to get more and more built up, and having a big front yard or backyard will become rarer and rarer. So with that in mind, I need to talk about something that might sound a bit boring to start with, but it's absolutely vital if we're going to make sure that people are going to be able to grow food. Because the future of Hamilton is written in the present, and unless we get onto the writing of it now, it will be too late by the time the future arrives. So this is a lesson I've learnt myself, and what I'm talking about is the Hamilton District Plan. So this is a document, it's a Hamilton City Council document, and it decides where there can be high-rises and apartments, where there's going to be dense urban development, where there should be sports parks and reserves and community gardens. Now, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but what I do have is personal experience of how important it is to get this district plan right. So about 12 years ago, a society I'm part of, which was the Riverlea Environment Society, we made a contribution to the formation of the Peacocke structure plan, which becomes a chapter of the district plan. So Peacocke, south of Hamilton, is going to be turned into suburban Hamilton eventually, quite soon actually. And 12 years ago the City Council put together a draft of what it might look like, and there was a road right up to the riverfront, very close to the riverbank, and we said, hey, you know, it's not appropriate, we need a big buffer between the river and the houses and the roads, especially because across the opposite side of the river where we live and look after is Hammond Bush, which is a really beautiful biodiverse patch of native bush with birds, with our threatened bats, with heaps of invertebrates, and it could effectively expand their habitat because they can fly across the river, they don't mind if there's a river in between. And so we made a submission to the Hamilton City Council. It was put out for submission, this Peacocke structure plan, and we made a submission and it was accepted, so we were delighted. We knew that in future there would be this broad swathe of land available across the river. So it was a bit of a shock a couple of years ago when the first developer applied for resource consent to start turning Peacocke into a new suburb of Hamilton. And right up close to the river was the houses. That buffer wasn't there. But we knew that it was actually quite buried in there in the district plan, that broad swathe of land had been set aside, and it was only because we'd done that 12 years ago that we were able to push the developer back from the river. It was still a battle. It has been accepted though. It's not as wide as it was going to be because unbeknownst to us someone had appealed the district plan and had it reduced. It's not going to be our native bush, but it's still going to be land that's available to turn into that in future. Although the conditions of all this are before the Environment Court at the moment. So money talks, you see. In the future, if there's not areas set aside for community gardens and land to grow on, the developers will take it because they want every bit of land for sections so they can build houses and they can sell these for profit, and every house lot increases their profitability, and they have a lot of money and powerful lawyers, and it's a really hard battle. But anyone can get in at the early stage and make submissions on this. It's a boring job, but we've kind of got to do it. So this is my point, that if we want to protect what we know that Hamiltonians of the future will want to have access to, a land to grow our kai, we don't have to rely on the other side of the world and the planes to bring it to us. We have to have that in the structure plan. The great thing is that at the moment we have a city council that seems really supportive of such things like community gardens and putting them in the structure plan. But unless people like us come in and say yes, we want them too, when these things come up for submissions, they need our support. And yeah, so we just need to use our imagination. The future of Hamilton will pack in way more people and way more housing. And at the moment we've got abundant space for growing if you look for it. We've got community gardens with allotment style gardens that you can use and grow on. We've got Grandview and the Fairfield project. And we've got our own properties. Those of us who are lucky enough to have our front yard and backyard. Just to finish off, I feel as though we're still colonists of the land, and wouldn't it be wonderful if people had gone before us had all thought a bit harder? Couldn't they have left the bush on the top of the mountains and on the steep hill slopes? Couldn't they have left those gullies we've got in Hamilton with their magnificent bush, and now they're weed infested? Couldn't they have thought harder about bringing possums and stoats here? And we wish they'd done a better job of thinking ahead, but what we can do now is think ahead and consider what future generations will be grateful to us for doing for them. Thank you.
Wow.